It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. These lines from Charles Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities could well have been written for the opening decades of the 20th century. A time when the relentless march of progress echoed an eerie cadence with the more powerful forces of destruction. During the first half of the 1900s, the spark of humanity had seldom burned so bright or been so blinded by senseless fury. Yet even in troubled times, our attention can be diverted by those who set their sights on excellence. The memorable few who remind us that there is no limit to the human spirit and our own human potential. During the 3 decades between the world wars, those who followed the sport of golf would come to learn the true meaning of exceptional. The Professional Golfers Association of America presents The Complete History of Golf. Volume 2, The Boom Between the Wars. "1914 was a fateful year that would signal the end of the Victorian era and the beginning of a technological society. The carefully choreographed entanglements of Europe's monarchies led to a chorus of strained alliances which erupted in the dreadful cacophony of World War. Germany, Austria-Hungary, Bulgaria, and Turkey faced off in mortal combat with the armies of France, Britain, Belgium, Italy, and Russia. Everyone looked forward to a brief and glorious war. They couldn't have been more wrong. New technologies such as machine guns, fighter planes, tanks, and poison gas turned the grand infantry assaults of previous wars into a slaughter of unthinkable proportions. For the first time in human history, 1 million young men would fall in a single battle. Golf throughout Europe became an early casualty of the Great War. The British and French Opens were canceled from 1914 through 1917. With the great triumvirate approaching 50 and a whole generation pinned down on the battlefield, the British domination of golf was rapidly drawing to a close. America did not enter the Great War until April of 1917, and even then the American Expeditionary Force was small in comparison to the millions of European soldiers shivering in endless trenches. This left many young Americans free to carry clubs instead of rifles. By 1916, Eugenio Sarazen, the young son of an Italian immigrant, was working as a caddy in Rye, New York.
In the early days when I went to school, we used to make our own clubs. The principal of the school was absolutely opposed to that because we were always late getting in school. So they'd go around the class and take up all the clubs and take them downstairs and burn them in the furnace. Well, we knew where they burned them, so we'd go down there and pick the iron heads and build another shaft.
Gene Sarazen would become Hagen's partner in establishing an American beachhead in golf. 14-year-old Bobby Jones in his first tournament reached the 3rd round of the U.S. Amateur. He too would begin an era of U.S. domination in the sport. Sam Snead, Byron Nelson, and Ben Hogan all turned 4 years old and were not yet considered serious contenders. With fresh troops from the United States, it was only a matter of time for Germany and the Central Powers. Still, the war in Europe raged on. When the war ended and championship play resumed, 26-year-old Walter Hagen was stronger than ever. He still suffered from wild drives, but his short game was nothing less than spectacular. It seemed every terrible hook or slice was followed by a miraculous recovery and an equally amazing putt. He gave the gallery an emotional joyride seldom seen in any sport, and they loved him for it.
He had one of the best dispositions of all times for golf. Nothing flustered him. He didn't worry about anything. Was late all the time just because he couldn't pass anybody without saying hello and having a visit. He was remarkable.
The Hague took the 1919 Open by storm. He battled the field at Braeburn down to the final putt. If he could sink it, he would win his second Open. If he missed it, he would tie with Mike Brady. In typical Hagen style, he refused to sink the putt until Brady was called from the clubhouse to witness his shot. With Brady standing sullenly on the green, Hagen putted. The ball headed for the hole, then spun out, forcing a playoff the next day. Still, Hagen's spirit was indomitable. That night, he drove a young lady to Boston to see a musical, then threw a party in his hotel room for the show's star, Al Jolson. Like C.B. McDonald, 25 years earlier, Hagen drank champagne until 4 in the morning. Hungover and suffering from less than 3 hours of sleep, Hagen beat Mike Brady to win his second U.S. Open. Walter Hagen returned to an Oakland Hills party in his honor and surprised everyone by resigning as club pro. He was determined to be the first player to make his living solely by prize money and exhibitions. In his place, he toasted the best man for the job, Mike Brady, the rival he had just defeated. Walter Hagen was determined to change the way pros were being treated. When he competed in the 1920 British Open, professionals had to eat under a tent while amateurs enjoyed their meal in the clubhouse. So Sir Walter hired an airplane to fly his fellow pros to a famous restaurant every day for what he called the superior strawberries. His golfing that tour was abysmal, but he had made a devastating point.
I partnered Hagen in the international four-ball matches the first time I played in them, and he scared me to death because when we were being called to the tee, he still hadn't shown up. And he did within a minute or two after they've stopped calling us. He pulls up in front of the Miami Country Club and gets out of a yellow taxi in a tuxedo. Apologizes for being late. And they didn't disqualify us. I was sure they disqualified us. So we got ready, and they started us dead last. And Walter didn't finish any one of the first 5 holes. He picked up on all 5 of them. He just hit a bad shot, and Paul can play him on this hole. Well, after he recovered and started to play, he was 7 under par. We lost the next day, 6-5 to Sarazen and Farrell after he'd gotten a good night's sleep. Oh, he was priceless.
Although Scottish-born Jock Hutchison and Jim Barnes had been the first U.S. citizens to win the British Open, Walter Hagen became the first American-born player to win the title in 1922. In fact, Hagen won 4 British Opens between 1922 and 1929, and the reluctant British came to love him as much as any American fan.
Walter Hagen was a great extrovert. He was one of the players who not only played great golf, but seemed to be able to raise his golf for a particular occasion. He would go out and he would lose a match, a friendly match or a minor match one day, and the next day he'd be playing, or the next week he'd be playing in a championship, he'd win it by a mile. But he was a great showman. He loved life, I think, as much as he loved golf. And he must have done an awful lot to popularize the game, I think, in those days.
Hagen's social life would have kept today's supermarket tabloids salivating. He was equally comfortable with royalty, millionaires, stars, or plain old folks. He and baseball legend Babe Ruth often teamed up to drink less hearty revelers under the table. Hagen also became friends with the Prince of Wales, who was to become King Edward VII, before abdicating his throne for the love of a woman. This left country clubs in a dilemma. How could they deny access to a man whom the future King of England treated almost as an equal? Sir Walter's celebrity status ended forever the prejudice against golf professionals. In addition to his 2 U.S. and 4 British Open titles, Hagen won 5 PGA championships in 6 years. After winning in 1925, he put the Wanamaker Cup in a New York taxi and asked the cabbie to take care of it while he hit the town. Since Hagen won the PGA the next 2 years, nobody asked about the cup. When Leo Deagle took the PGA in 1928, Hagen casually explained that the last time he saw the trophy was 3 years earlier in the backseat of a New York cab. A number of years passed before the Wanamaker Cup was discovered in the basement of a Detroit golf equipment manufacturer. Hagen hit the road with trick shot artist Joe Kirkwood on a grueling 9-month string of worldwide golf exhibitions. His personal popularity packed them in wherever he went. This was Sir Walter, the Hague, bigger than life and twice as charming. He became the first athlete to earn $1 million, but he spent money as fast as he earned it. As Hagen himself said, he didn't want to be a millionaire, just live like one. If Walter Hagen captured the imagination of golf fans throughout the world, Bobby Jones captured their hearts. In his brief career as a competitive golfer, Jones proved himself to be the greatest amateur player of all time, eclipsing even the legendary John Ball of England. The press adored him, and he understood their value. Even his opponents couldn't hide their admiration. Bobby Jones, Georgia's gentle whirlwind, would achieve more in 7 years than anyone before, or few since have been able to achieve in a lifetime. Robert Tyre Jones was born in Atlanta, Georgia in 1902. In the summer, he lived near the East Lake Country Club, and his interest in golf began before he was 6 years old. Around that time, he played in his first match with 2 other boys and a girl from the neighborhood, Alexa Sterling. She won the match, but Jones took home the cup. Alexa, it should be noted, would go on to win the U.S. Women's Amateur Championship 3 times. Jones studied the swing of Stuart Maiden, the club professional of Eastlake, and followed him around the fairways whenever Maiden played the course. Golf was never to be the only career for this young Southerner. His interests would lead him to study mechanical engineering at Georgia Tech, literature at Harvard, and law at Emory. Yet golf's lure was irresistible. Jones won the Georgia Amateur in 1916 when he was only 14 years old. He made it to the quarterfinals of the U.S. Amateur Championship that same year. Championship golf requires more than strength and style. One needs a competitive spirit, and Jones had that. And when it boiled over, clubs would break or take flight. Between 1916 and 1923, Bobby Jones matured as both a player and as an individual. He finished 8th in his first U.S. Open in 1920. In 1921, he played poorly and withdrew from the British Open in the 3rd round. This spurred him to get control of his temper while maintaining his will to play flawless golf. 1923 was the year it all came together for the talented 21-year-old. He won his first U.S. Open when he defeated Bobby Cruikshank in the playoff by shooting a 76 to Cruikshank's 78. In 1924, the man in the white sweater defeated George Von Elm in the final match 9-8 to win the U.S. Amateur Championship at Marion in Ardmore, Pennsylvania. At the Worcester Country Club in Massachusetts, he accidentally jostled his ball, which was hidden in the rough, and called a stroke penalty on himself. No one else had seen the ball move. He lost in a playoff to William McFarland by 1 stroke in the 1925 U.S. Open. When he won both the U.S. and British Opens in 1926, the city of New York threw him a ticker tape parade. His victories over tough opponents like Joe Ternessa, George Van Elm, and Walter Hagen proved how far he had come in the world of golf. People began to compare his skills to those of the legendary young Tom Morris. Here at the British Open in 1927, he defended his title with 17 birdies and an eagle on his way to a record score of 285 to take his second British Open crown. He picked up another U.S. Amateur Championship in 1928. Of the four most prestigious golfing events in the world at the time, the British and U.S. Open and the Amateur Championships, Jones was among the few who had earned more than one of these titles in any single year. It seemed as though he had few other goals to seek. Other top golfers of the period included McDonald Smith, Alec Ross, George Von Elm, Jock Hutchison, two-time PGA champ Leo Deagle with his unique putting style, and British stars George Duncan, Archie Compston, and Abe Mitchell. Freed from the heavy skirts and stiff collars of early women golfers, women of the Roaring Twenties changed their game to match their change in dress. Scottish-born Dorothy Campbell won the British Championship in 1909 with the U.S. Women's Amateur title that same year. She won the U.S. Women's title again in 1910. In 1925, now married, the 43-year-old Dorothy Campbell Hurd won the U.S. title again. Bobby Jones' childhood friend, Alexa Sterling, displayed her continuing excellence by winning the U.S. Championship both before and after the war. However, she met her match in Britain's Cecil Leach, the first woman to use an all-out attack on the ball with her swing. Charismatic and confident, she took no prisoners when she stepped onto the tee. Leach won the British title in 1914, 20, 21, and 26. Her style lifted the women's game up a notch, but she soon would be tested by another strong and accurate player, Joyce Wethered. Wethered won her first British title at the age of 21 in 1922. After winning it 3 times, she retired from the game, or so she thought. Her arch rival from the United States was Glenna Collette. Collette grew up in Rhode Island, and after seeing Bobby Jones and Alexa Sterling play an exhibition for the benefit of the Red Cross, she knew where she wanted to direct her exceptional athletic skills. Before she was finished, she would post a record 6 U.S. Women's Amateur titles. Yet the lure of the British title still attracted her, and she began a new attempt in 1929. The British urged Joyce Wethered out of retirement to keep the championship from falling into American hands. When they met in the finals, Glenna Collette took an early lead with a commanding 5-up after the first 9, but Wethered was not finished yet. The large galleries crowded around the players during the match. Joyce revealed to writer Louise Mayer that her renowned concentration had been challenged.
Oh, yes. Fascinating, actually. I remember one thing she told me was that the crowds were so big that they had to have referees walking with them. And the referee she'd had with her had been carrying a sort of crackling Macintosh, and it was disturbing her. And she thought to herself, you know, should I tell this man to go away, or should I just ignore it? And eventually she decided there'd be less hassle attached to ignoring it, and so she just forgot about it, put it out of her mind, and got on with the game. She had incredible concentration. I think she used to talk about sort of going into a cocoon of concentration, and nothing could disturb her.
At the end of the first 18, Wethered had reduced Glenna's lead to 2. At the end of 9 holes in the afternoon round, Joyce was leading by 4. Collette battled back with 2 winning holes. However, it would not be enough. Joyce maintained her lead and closed out the match on the 17th hole. The showdown between the 2 greatest women golfers of the era ended with Joyce Wethered saving the title for England. Just how good was she? Bobby Jones and Henry Cotton considered her the best woman golfer who ever lived, and many others also admired her game.
Well, I think Joyce Wethered, in my 70 years, I think Joyce Wethered was the greatest woman golfer I've seen.
Her exceptional talent and determination under pressure earned Joyce Weathered a place among golf's greatest champions. Although the British Open was rapidly becoming American property, Britain still held a few aces. Ted Ray and Harry Vardon again blazed through the U.S. in 1920. The two legendary golfers hoped to overcome their defeat in the 1913 U.S. Open by entering the 1920 Open at Inverness. Vardon was 50 years old and took an early lead in the championship. Ray, who was 7 years younger, slipped ahead to win the national title by one stroke. At 43, Ted Ray became the oldest golfer to win the U.S. Open. After Harry Vardon's victory in 1900, it was only the second time the U.S. championship was won by a non-American. With this swan song to Ray and the great triumvirate, a tall Scotsman named Tommy Armour took up the British colors. Armour was a member of the 1921 British team during an unofficial Walker Cup match. Years later, as a naturalized American citizen and golf pro, he helped the U.S. team score a Ryder Cup victory. Armour took up golf as therapy after he lost an eye during World War I. He took so much shrapnel, doctors feared he would never walk again. In one battle, he leapt from a tank to strangle a German officer with his bare hands. Those same powerful hands could control a golf club with impressive skill. Stories are told that Armour could lift a pool cue off the table horizontally, just by grabbing the very tip with his thumb and two fingers. His imposing stature and hero's record gave Armour a swashbuckling image which complemented Walter Hagen's. In fact, Hagen alone could match Armour drink for drink. The Silver Scots career highlights include the 1927 U.S. Open, the 1931 British Open at Carnoustie, and a PGA championship in the same year as Bobby Jones' Grand Slam. World War I soon showed the terrifying cost of nationalism taken to the extreme. However, representing one's country in a sporting match often brought out the best in a player. As the focus of attention on golf shifted to the United States, a friendly rivalry emerged. The president of the USGA, George Herbert Walker, proposed a team match between the best amateur players in the world. Only the British were able to accept. Walker offered a challenge trophy, soon to be called the Walker Cup. W.C. Founds captained the U.S. team in the first official match, a team which featured Francis Ouimet and Bobby Jones. The Great Britain and Ireland team traveled to the National Golf Links of America in Southampton, New York. And despite the efforts of Tommy Armour and Bernard Darwin's last-minute heroics, they lost 8-4. They lost again in 1923 at St. Andrews, and again in the States in 1924. The matches went to St. Andrews in 1926, when a new plan to meet every 2 years was adopted. The U.S. team won a close match 6-5, with one match halved. Bobby Jones played on every U.S. team from 1921 through 1930. It wasn't until 1938 that the Great Britain and Ireland team would win. Then the matches were suspended until 1947. Francis Ouimet competed 8 times and was captain of the Walker Cup team 6 times. Ouimet had another surprise for the golfing world in 1931. 17 years after his victory in the National Amateur, Ouimet again found himself in the final round of the championship at the Beverly Country Club in Chicago, Illinois. His opponent was Jack Westland, and Francis was pleased to see his friend Bobby Jones as a spectator. Ouimet felt he had the match won when he halved the 27th hole and went into the last 9 against Westland with a 5-hole lead. He closed out the match on the 13th hole and tried to express his feelings after his long-sought victory.
There's very little I can say. I'd be telling an untruth if I said that I wasn't extremely happy that I won today.
Golf mania was spreading like wildfire. Automobiles helped make America mobile and eager for excitement. Nearly 4 million golfers crowded America's fairways, making it one of the nation's fastest-growing sports. Unfortunately, many people did not have access to the acres needed to lay out a golf course. In 1916, James Barber and Edward H. Wiswell created the first midget golf course in Pinehurst, North Carolina. This sparked a mini golf boom, small in size but long in imagination. This 18-hole putting green was built on a rooftop in London, overlooking the Thames River. From oceanfront to city skyline, golf had seen a lot of changes in its 500-year history. Harriet Curtis won the U.S. Amateur Championship in 1906 and lost the following year to her sister, Margaret. The sisters were dominant players in the early 1900s. However, they will be remembered not only for their playing skills, but for their contribution of the Curtis Cup to golf, a match play event with a format similar to the Walker Cup. Along with a big push from Glennicolette Vare, the matches officially got underway in 1932, with the U.S. team taking the cup that year, and again in 1934. There were some new faces appearing on the women's golf scene in 1931. Helen Hicks won the U.S. Women's Amateur at the Country Club of Buffalo in Williamsville, New York. She did it by defeating Glennicolette Vare. A lot of attention was paid to the British champion, Enid Wilson, who lost in one of the semifinals.
Mr. Ramsey, ladies and gentlemen, I feel that I must say how very much I've enjoyed coming over here. I came in trepidation, but I received such a hearty welcome that I certainly don't want to go home. But I hope to be over next year. I'd just like to say how much I thank you for all your kindness.
In 1932, Virginia Van Wee defeated Glennicolette Vare, and in 1933 she won out over Helen Hicks as she took the second of her 3 straight championships. The long-driving Van Wee would retire after her win in '34. In 1935, Glenna was back again to take the championship at the Interlochen Country Club in Minnesota, defeating a 14-year-old from that state who remembers the event very well.
What happened is we started out, and I started to putting right away. I think I was a little nervous. And I remember my dad, my brother saying to my father, he said, boy, if she 3 putts many more greens, we won't be here through 9. And we get into the 15th hole. And I was on about 20 feet from the hole, and Glenna was on, and I was in 2, and Glenna was on in 3, about 25 feet away. And she hold that 25-footer to get a halve. And then on 16, I'm 2 down now, and 3 to play. I was up again about 20 feet from the hole, and she was above the pin about 20 feet. Again, I'm 2 down, and we both have putts for a birdie, and Glenna hold hers for a birdie, and she beat me 3 and 2.
Glennicolette Vare led the Curtis Cup team to Gleneagles, Scotland. Hattie Berg was selected for the U.S. team, as was Pam Barton, 1936 U.S. and British women's champion for the Great Britain-Ireland team. Patty remembered those 2 days of competition.
Some of those players today are still very close friends of mine. And Glenn and I were placed together. Glenna was captain. And we tied our first match in the alternate shot match. And then in the afternoon, I played Helen Holm, and she beat me 4-3. So I only collected a half a point for us. But it was such a thrill. And I remember, boy, what a rainy and cold day, sleet, and it even looked like snow to me. But the people over there and my teammates and everybody were wonderful to me, especially Glenna. And on that team was a lady by the name of Opal Hill. And she was so nice to me and kind of took me under her wing, and I'll never forget it.
That memorable 1936 Curtis Cup match ended in a tie. The war canceled the matches after 1938. Pam Barton would join the women's reserves and lose her life in a wartime accident. For 10 years, the Curtis Cup was destined to remain on the shelf. Golf terms were rapidly creeping into the vocabulary, including par for the course, I'm stymied, and top flight. 20 years earlier, George Crump and his friends were battling at the links at Atlantic City. Crump's fairway shot rose so high it bounced off a very surprised bird and rolled to within a few feet of the hole. The lucky golfer putted for a 1 under par. After that, the trio called any hole score of 1 under par a birdie. The term caught on and led to further elaborations, such as an eagle for 2 under par and an albatross or double eagle for 3 under par. Bobby Jones' long trek to glory began on May 31st, 1930 with the British Amateur Championship. He teetered up here at St Andrews in Scotland and made it to the final round against Roger Wethered, the 1923 British Amateur Champion, and brother of the much-admired women's champion, Joyce Wethered. Earlier against Cyril Tolley, Jones needed 1 extra hole to win a difficult match. But the final was different. Crowds thronged around the golfers as Jones closed out the match 7-up with 6 holes to go. He picked up his first British Amateur Championship, and then it was on to Hoylake and the British Open, where he would take his 3rd victory in that event by shooting a .291. Jones now seemed taller than 5'9". The British fans loved him. And back in the States, Bobby Jones became the only man in history to ever receive 2 New York ticker tape parades. As Jones prepared for the 1930 U.S. Open, the golfing world was already alive with speculation. If Jones could win this 3rd title in the same year, he would be declared one of the greatest golfers of all time. Bobby Cruikshank bet $500 with an English bookmaker that Jones would sweep all 4 tournaments. The bookie gave him odds of 120 to 1. The bookies never counted on the sheer determination of Robert Tyre Jones. He won the U.S. Open by 2 strokes over McDonald Smith. One was a stroke of luck when his ball skipped off the surface of a pond on the 9th hole and set the stage for his birdie there. The other was a stroke of genius, this magnificent 40-foot putt to secure the championship. Bob Jones was the first man to break par for 72 holes in the U.S. Open. In the midst of a sweltering heat wave, Jones took 1 more step toward destiny. His next stop was the U.S. Amateur Championship held at the Marion Cricket Club in Ardmore, Pennsylvania. Bobby Jones swept through a field of top amateurs to face Eugene Homans in the final match. The crowd of 18,000 swelled around the twosome, hoping to witness a truly historic moment. Jones played with disarming ease and accuracy on the course where he began his championship golfing career. Homans would sink putts like this to stave off the inevitable defeat. The crowd sensed that he could not change the course of history, but Robert Tyre Jones could, and did. Here on a fall afternoon in Pennsylvania, with an 8-hole lead and only 7 to play, it ended. O.B. Keeler, the reporter who followed Jones throughout his entire career, called his latest achievement the impregnable quadrilateral. 28-year-old Bobby Jones had done the impossible. He had won the Grand Slam, the 4 major tournaments of the time. There were no more golfing worlds to conquer, and soon after his feat, Jones announced his retirement from competitive golf. Home in Atlanta, the measure of his achievements were set before him. He had established a standard by which other golfers would come to measure themselves. And what of his friend Bobby Cruikshank? He won his $500 bet from that London bookmaker for a payoff of $60,000. Robert Tyre Jones was now determined to spend more time with his family, develop his business interests, and fulfill one more golfing dream. During the 20s, the biggest names in golf were Walter Hagen and Bobby Jones. When the two met in a head-to-head challenge match, it seemed there were no other golfers on the planet. Yet by the mid-30s, both of these great players would no longer be a factor in tournament golf, while one of their main opponents would continue to compete for decades. His name was Gene Sarazen.
70 years of golf. The greatest championship I ever won was in the fall of 1922 when I was traveling to Florida with Jock Hutchison on a tour, and we opened the Hollywood Country Club. I'll never forget that. And that night they were having a dinner, and I sat down and I saw this very pretty blonde. And I remember the woman's, the hostess's name was Mrs. O'Brien. So I called her over. I says, Mrs. O'Brien, who's that blonde I can see over there? I'd like to meet her. So I went over and met her, and I invited her to watch us play the next day. And she came out, and that's where the romance started. 1924, I was married, and we were married for 62 years. And I always say that was the greatest championship I've won.
The son of an Italian immigrant, Eugenio Saraceni was born 2 weeks before Bobby Jones to a working-class family.
The carpenters would lay the boards out and say, go ahead, kid, hammer away. And I'd hammer these 8-penny nails, bang, bang. Well, that's the golf stroke. So that helped me a lot.
After a near-fatal attack of pleurisy, young Gene took a caddy job at a nearby public course.
Ed Sullivan was 98, and I was 99. And the story goes back that in those days, you know, you went by the bag. If a fellow had a bag with brand new clubs, you know you're going to get a big tip. Well, Ed Sullivan was like Pavo Nurmi. He could outrun me anytime. And the caddy shack was up in the woods, and the caddy master would say, next two, 98, 99. And we'd run for the bags. Well, the bags came from the locker room. And there was this brand new bag with brand new set of clubs, and it was a police commissioner from New York. And he ran and grabbed that bag, and I was left with a little Sunday bag, and it had rusty clubs, and it had GR, and I didn't know what GR meant. And then I saw them coming up the hill. The police commissioner was a big, roly-poly, big belly, Commissioner Enright, and the other fellow's name was Grantland Rice. And I said to myself, Grantland Rice, what does that mean? Oh, he's a great sports writer in Atlanta. Well, I grabbed the bag, and he and I fell in love with each other for the rest of our lives until he died. And, oh, he was a wonderful fellow. Well, I got the big tip, and Sullivan didn't get the tip. And so he started balking. I says, don't go by the bag.
Gene's talents with a club became obvious to all, and he won an assistant pro job at the Brooklawn Country Club.
I was working for a pro that didn't quite like me so much, because in those days, you know, the Scotch pros looked upon us as caddies, because they used to win all the big events, and we couldn't do anything. So one day, he started to talk about the par 5 hole. I says, and my sponsor, Mr. Wheeler, was there. I says, oh, I can knock 2 shots on that hole and on the green. He says, what'll you bet? I said, I bet you $5. And we walked out in the rain, and I teed up a ball and teed up a second and put it on the green, and he gave me $5. Well, I was through. I was finished there.
Gene Sarazen was stocky and determined, and these traits carried over to his style of play. He changed his name to Sarazen because he felt Sarah Chaney sounded more like a violin maker's name than a golfer's.
I saw Chick Evans and Francis Weeman and Jim Barnes walking down the first tee, and I had won the Southern Open. I had a little recognition. I said, Francis, you mind if I make a foursome? And Jim Barnes looks over and he says, Francis, I don't want that fresh kid in my foursome. And so I just ducked out. And right after I won the championship, somebody put up $1,500 down to Long Branch, New Jersey, for the former Open and the present Open. And I accepted the challenge, and I went down there, and he was practicing. And I never forget, the day before, I met J.H. Taylor and Sandy Hurd at the Biltmore Hotel, and they said to me, son, what are you doing here? You should go down and practice to beat that big fella. I said, I don't need practice to beat him. That's how fresh I was a kid. And so I go down there, and he wanted to split the purse some way, and I said, no, we're going to play winner take all, and he didn't like that. So I beat him 6-5, and then I played him again in the PGA Championship. I think it was Baltimore, and you know, he shot a 69, and I beat him 1 up. That was the last of the Barnes episode.
By the time he was 20, Sarazen, affectionately nicknamed the Squire, defeated Bobby Jones to win the National Open.
The last round, I shot a 68, and Jones came to the last hole, had to get a 3, an eagle to tie. Well, he didn't. He got a 4. He was 1 shot behind. And John Black, who was a grandfather at that time, he finished a stroke behind. I was very lucky to win that tournament because on the last hole, you know, I was going to play it a little cautiously, safe. There was a lake, as I recall, on the right-hand side, and the caddy said to me, his name was Domenico. He said, he says, I wouldn't play safe. Take that driver and hit it. It was against the wind. I took that driver and put it about 15 feet from the hole and missed the putt for an eagle and got a 4. And then I walked to the clubhouse. I didn't know that I was going to win. But then Leo Deagle come run up at the fairway. He says, Jones and Black just put it in the woods. You won the championship. Oh, boy. Well, I didn't know how to act or anything. I'll never forget, at the railroad station, I still see it as if it was yesterday, I walked into O.B. Keeler and Bobby Jones, and I had the cup. I said, look at it. Jones says, I'd like to play you for that tomorrow.
In 1932, Gene Sarazen captured both the U.S. and British Opens. He felt he owed both these victories to the new sand wedge he developed.
I had somehow or other gone out with Howard Hughes on a plane, and he'd take off right out of the hangar, you know. He was a fool. He'd take it right off. And he'd always go out there with a bunch of filing the blades. So I got this feeling, taking lessons from flying, that when you pull that stick back, the tail goes down and you shoot up. So I went back to Newport Richie and I bought all the solder I could get and had Wilson send me about a dozen sand irons. It wasn't called a sand iron, the wedges. So I put all this solder in back of there with files and sneaked out to this little 3-hole course we had got into the worst trap on the course and started filing away this solder. Finally, I got the one that I liked. I could bet you anything from anywhere, go down at 2. Well, I first introduced it at a match at the Biltmore in a foursome with Hogan. Hogan and I played 2 other fellas in the Goodall and Sneed, and we won the match. And so I went to the British Open, 1932, and I was all hepped up about this club because that was my worst shot. I had lost several Opens before that by taking 7 on a par 4 hole, and so I saw Princess Golf Club. I started off, and I put 2 or 3 shots in the traps on the first 9 holes, and each time they were up like that. And I could hear the gallery saying, "I say, have you seen that new weapon that Sarazen has?" Well, I used to put it in the bag upside down. Well, then when I got through and I shot, I think, about a 68 or 9, the R&A took a look at it, and they couldn't do anything because the tournament had started. And then I got back to Fresh Meadow, did the same thing. 1 out of the traps, down and 2, down and 2. And then, of course, everybody started copying.
Gene, I've been having a lot of trouble with the shot. I wish you could help me.
Well, let me see you hit one.
What am I going to do about that?
Watch. See, take your club up here, more upright.
And now these players here are playing much better than I do. They're deadly. They'd rather be in the sand than in the grass.
In more than 6 decades of championship golf, Gene Sarazen won numerous tournaments, including 2 U.S. Opens, 1 British Open, and 3 PGA championships. In years to come, he would bring national attention to the Masters with an amazing double eagle that was called the greatest single shot in the history of championship golf. Just as the Walker Cup matches were designed for amateurs, a proposal by Walter Hagen and publisher James Harnett initiated 2 unofficial team matches in 1921 and 1926 between British and American professionals. A wealthy seed merchant, Samuel Ryder, seen here with his daughter, attended the second of these events and offered to underwrite expenses to send Abe Mitchell and a team of top British professionals to the United States the following year. Ryder donated a beautiful gold trophy with a figure fashioned after his friend and golf teacher, Abe Mitchell. The first official match took place in June of 1927 at the Worcester Country Club in Worcester, Massachusetts. The host team was captained by Walter Hagen. The British team readied for departure under the captaincy of Ted Ray. At the last moment, Abe Mitchell was stricken with appendicitis and unable to make the trip. It was a blow to the British hopes for success. The U.S. squad won 9.5 to 2.5. In 1929, at the Moortown Golf Club in Leeds, England, on the strength of Archie Compston's defeat of Gene Sarazen and Hagen's loss to British captain George Duncan, and newcomer Henry Cotton's victory over Al Watrous, the British team triumphed 7-5. The U.S. team rallied back to win the 1931 matches at the Scioto Country Club in Columbus, Ohio. In 1933 at Southport and Ainsdale Golf Club in Southport, Walter Hagen came close to beheading British captain J.H. Taylor. The matches proved to be just as close, with the British team winning an exciting match 6.5 to 5.5 to collect the trophy. It was the last match Samuel Ryder would ever see. He died in 1936 before the matches returned to England. In 1935, captains Walter Hagen and Charles Whitcomb led their teams at the Ridgewood Country Club in New Jersey. The match play formula remained the same. The first day was for foursomes, 2-man teams playing alternate shots. The second day was reserved for 18-hole singles matches to determine the outcome. The United States won this match 9-3. The 1937 matches were underway as Henry Cotton teed off for the British team. Byron Nelson, along with Ralph Gouldall, were the first-time members of the American squad. Di Reese was playing his first Ryder Cup along with the 1936 British Open champion Alfred Pageant. However, they would not be able to hold off the American team, who would win their first Ryder Cup on British soil. few would guess that it would be 10 years before the matches would resume. But the victory would be a meaningful one for Captain Walter Hagen.
I want to say that today I've had the greatest thrill of my golfing life. We have won that beautiful gold trophy for the first time on American soil. British. So you will see how I feel at home. I want to congratulate Captain Charles Whitcomb for the grand showing that he has made with all the boys. They have done their very best, I know, and the matches were very, very close. It was only toward the last few matches that I didn't have to eat the cigarettes, I could smoke them.
Ever since railroads connected the commercial centers of the East with the vast potential of the western frontier, America was on the upswing. Great inventors helped propel the country toward prosperity, while tycoons like Rockefeller and Carnegie added steam to the financial juggernaut. The dawning of the new century and the wildly roaring 20s made it seem like there was no stopping the American economy. That is, until the day it ground to a halt. The stock market crash of 1929 took place over a few days and immediately left thousands of investors penniless. No one could believe how quickly the party was over. President Herbert Hoover boasted that we in America today are nearer to the final triumph over poverty than ever before in the history of any land. America's economic crisis helped push every developed country in the world into full-scale depression. The underlying cause was debt. Debt from the cost of waging a world war. Debt from speculative stock investing. Debt as a result of easy credit. Everyone assumed the good days would last forever. When the time came to pay it all back, investors, corporations, and whole economies writhed in a downward spiral of default and economic collapse. By 1932, more than 400 American banks were closing every month. Auto manufacturing was only 9% of the production levels just 3 years before. And 1 out of every 4 Americans was out of work. Everywhere, the specter of imminent disaster was beginning to emerge. Joseph Stalin's purges bathed the Soviet state in blood. And the death of President Hindenburg left a failed postcard artist named Adolf Hitler, the Führer of Germany. Golf remained a popular form of escape during these troubled times. Although nearly a fourth of all country clubs went bankrupt, new golfers flocked to the thousands of public and private courses spread across the United States. In a nation yearning for heroes, Hagen and Jones epitomized the indomitable spirit of the individual. Gene Sarazen proved that ethnic discrimination could be overcome by those with enough will to do it. Their triumphs made these great players seem larger than life and reassuringly real. Golf might not solve all your problems, but it could offer a few hours of peace in an increasingly frightening world. Gene Sarazen remained the transitional powerhouse from the era of Hagen and Jones to the days of Nelson, Hogan, and Snead. Sarazen became golf's spokesman and conscience, but other golfers rose to fame in the 30s. Paul Runyon, small of stature but long on talent, would go from Arkansas caddy to major money winner on the newly formed professional tour. His first year on the tour netted him $4,700, a respectable amount of money for the time. He went on to win the PGA Championships in 1934 and 1938.
Some people keep referring to, well, you were born 30 years too soon. It's true that I didn't win much money. I finished in the money approximately 500 times in my life and won 51 times and still won less than $200,000. The highest point of my career was winning the PGA championship at the Park Club in Buffalo. I beat Craig Wood one up in 38 holes, and he had been my boss at Forest Hill. And another incident with Craig, he allowed me to play in the New Jersey State Open when he was assistant, and with 1 round to go, we were tied. And he shot 69, but I shot 66. And I was sure he was going to fire me, and instead he gave me a raise.
Other major tour players were Bobby Cruikshank and Al Espinoza, Craig Wood, Light Horse Harry Cooper, Olin Dutra, Johnny Farrell, Johnny Revolta, Wild Bill Milhorn, and Denny Shute, the last man to win 2 successive PGA championship titles in 1936 and 37. Shotmaker Henry Picard amassed a total of 34 tour victories between 1934 and 1942. Career highlights included the 1938 Masters, the 1939 PGA, and 2 Ryder Cup matches. In 1929, amateur Johnny Goodman surprised everyone by defeating Bobby Jones in the first round of the National Amateur. Although he didn't win that year, he took the title in 1937. Goodman became the last amateur to win the U.S. Open. From that point on, the rise in the status of professional golfers was matched by a decreasing emphasis on amateur competition. Canadian Ross Somerville defeated Goodman in the 1932 U.S. Amateur, marking the second and last time an American citizen would fail to win the championship. In 1932, Babe Didrikson represented her country in the Olympics. The Babe struck gold in javelin throwing and in the high hurdles and took silver for the high jump. The Babe would soon trade in her track shoes for golf glory. Golf was becoming a growth industry in the United States. The invention of the golf tee was a good example. Up until 1910, golfers grabbed sand and water from a bucket to form a sand tee. Then a dentist named William Lowell whittled and adapted the base of a toy flagpole to create the Ready Tee Company. In its second year, Ready Tee received a single order for 1 billion tees from F.W. Woolworth. But it wasn't until Walter Hagen strolled the greens with a golf tee behind his ear that Lowell's invention became the standard for pros and duffers alike. Other manufacturers were constantly trying to develop the perfect golf ball. By 1926, there were so many different styles on the market that the USGA was forced to set a size and weight standard for tournament balls. The Royal and Ancient, as the ruling golf body in Britain, adopted a similar weight standard, but allowed the diameter to be 6/100ths of an inch smaller. Golf clubs also evolved from their earlier appearance. Over the years, heads became smaller, the angle more severe. The finest Scottish clubs featured hand-turned hickory shafts from the woods of Tennessee. As golf spread worldwide, hickory proved too inconsistent for mass production. Wood shafts had other problems too. The torsion action of a swing would whip the flexible shaft, so the club head would not always hit the ball squarely. Each golfer toted a collection of clubs to suit whatever situation arose. There were spoons, mashie nibliks, and cleeks, clubs for getting the ball out of wagon ruts, out of water, and putters of all shapes and designs. Walter Hagen carried as many as 28 clubs in his bag at one time. The invention of steel shafts in 1911 meant greater consistency and longer power than flexible hickory shafts. Both the USGA and the Royal and Ancient banned steel-shafted clubs from tournament play until 1929. By the late 30s, the standardized set of 14 numbered clubs had replaced the endless variety of specialty implements. The multi-billion-dollar golf industry was in full swing. After 11 straight American wins, the British were finally able to regain ownership of their own National Open, thanks to golfers like Alfred Perry, Richard Burton, Alf Padgham, and the legendary Henry Cotton. Many consider Henry Cotton to have been the greatest British golfer since Harry Vardon.
Henry Cotton was the first great British professional of what I would say modern times, albeit we're talking about the 1920s, 30s. But he was a great player, a great gentleman, and he raised the whole status of professionals in this country. And I'm glad to say that he was a very good friend of mine.
By the age of 19, Henry Cotton had become a teaching pro at Langley Park in Beckenham. His concise swing, determined approach, and confident manner helped the British to their first Ryder Cup victory in 1929. Cotton took a temporary leave from his pro position at the Waterloo Club in Belgium to attend the 1934 British Open. In the second round of the championship, he shot an astounding 65, which stood as a British Open record for the next 44 years. In 1937, he won the British Open again. If World War II had not forced a 6-year cancellation of many of the championship tournaments, many believe Cotton might have matched Harry Vardon's 6 British Open titles. As it was, Cotton's third victory in 1948, 14 years after his first Open victory, made him the only golfer to win the British Open title both before and after the war. Henry Cotton would also be remembered as an international instructor, radio commentator, and respected golf writer. In America, name golfers could make big money by endorsing products or staging exhibitions. Teaching professionals counted on lessons and pro shop sales to see them through the lean years. But a new breed of golfer was emerging, the touring pro. When the Hague gave up his teaching position at Oakland Hills, he set a precedent for those who wanted to make their living on the tournament circuit. The closing of more than 1,000 country clubs during the Depression convinced even more to take their shot on the road. However, hard times reduced the number of tournaments and the prize money at stake. The only solution was to organize the remaining tournaments into a more profitable circuit. In early tour days, the wives of pro golfers took an active role in promoting the sport in cities around the nation. The golfers then hired a succession of leaders: Hal Sharkey, Francis Powers, and finally Walter Hagen's manager, Bob Harlow. Harlow was a marketing wizard years before most of the world knew what marketing was. He raised money, scheduled events so there would be less conflicts, standardized procedures, and barraged the press with information. Harlow began to build the circuit into a cohesive system of matches and championships. The enhancement of the tour led to a growing rift between the club professionals and the touring pros. Should a percentage of prize money be kicked back for organization, or should teaching pros be forced to support those on the circuit? Eventually, Harlow was succeeded by Fred Corcoran, a savvy administrator who knew how to sell business on the benefits of sponsoring tournaments. Corcoran convinced Sunbelt cities of the West and South that a winter tour would show northern investors how appealing their climate could be. Despite the Depression, Corcoran expanded the circuit to include over $175,000 in prize money. By the end of the decade, the Pro Tour was attracting nearly 500,000 spectators each year. Two tournament players who continued to rack up victories in the mid to late 30s were Horton Smith and Lawson Little. Lawson Little was perhaps the finest match player of all time. He captured both the British and U.S. amateur titles in 1934 and repeated these victories in 1935. His record for this period was 32 straight match play victories, 10 better than Walter Hagen's longest string and 18 more than Bobby Jones at his best. Little stood just under 6 feet tall with a stocky build that powered the ball down the fairway. His rugged good looks and dark wavy hair gave Fred Corcoran another marketing tool to use in his relentless drive to promote the Pro Tour. He earned the nickname Cannonball for his powerhouse drives, yet he was equally proficient on the putting green. Yet Lawson Little never achieved on the pro circuit what he did as an amateur. His biggest victory as a professional came in the 1940 U.S. Open, when he beat 38-year-old Gene Sarazen in a playoff. Horton Smith, on the other hand, was used to winning tournaments on the pro circuit. His 7 victories in 1930 and 4 second-place finishes earned him $20,000 on the pro tour. 6 years later, he would be the PGA's top money winner, with a Depression-era total of only $7,662. Horton Smith beat Bobby Jones in the Savannah Open just before Jones embarked on his impossible Grand Slam. But Smith's talents in attracting sponsors were also notable. He later became chairman of the touring committee and president of the PGA of America. Yet Horton Smith will most often be remembered as the man who won the first major tournament in Augusta, Georgia, the Masters. Writers such as Bernard Darwin and Grantland Rice spread the news of golf to thousands of readers. But a new innovation would bring the drama of tournament play to an even wider audience. Radio was about to transform the world of golf. Golf and radio seemed the perfect match. Listeners could imagine themselves on the green with their favorite player. They could picture in their minds the intense concentration, the electricity of the crowds, the thrill of a ball heading straight for the pin, and the devastation when it failed to fall. Early broadcasts were summaries or recreations reported long after the players had gone home. Bill Stern and Ted Husing gave golf its earliest voices. British reporter Henry Longhurst often confronted a live radio announcer's dilemma. Move too close and disturb the player. Move too far back and you miss the shot. To solve this problem, announcers were equipped with binoculars and put on towers or tree houses high above the action. This would lead to occasional complications.
These overtime matches were rather painful to be sitting up on the tower. So I sent one of the agency men down to get me the largest Pepsi-Cola cup he could find that I could use as an emergency outlet. I laid my mic down on the table and said, now I'll switch you back to Jack Drees at the 18th. The director had not told me to switch back, and you're never supposed to switch until the director tells you. But this was an emergency because during that switch, I was going to take care of nature there on the 17th tower. So I switched back, and Jack was not ready to accept it, and he made a couple of comments and said, and now back to John Durr at the 17th. Well, this time the action had started at the 17th hole. The Pepsi-Cola cup was beginning to fill up. The microphone was laying on the table, and the producer for Hughes Sports Network said, my God, it's clear up here, but it sounds like it's raining at the 17th hole.
Another problem with early coverage was the equipment. An announcer would carry a microphone tethered to a large transmitter that was strapped to the back of an assistant. 18 holes with a large transmitter on your back could strain even the most dedicated radio man. The fledgling radio networks were quick to capitalize on golf's growing popularity. Yet many early broadcasters had only a passing familiarity with the sport. Another sign that golf was permeating American culture was its frequent appearance on the newsreels. Before the advent of television, newsreels were shown in movie theaters prior to the actual feature. These classic films allowed millions of future fans to get their first up-close look at professional golf. With golf hitting the airwaves and the movie houses, the sport boomed in popularity. Sport of baseball is played on a carefully measured diamond. Football, a rectangle exactly 100 yards in length. Golf courses, on the other hand, are as unique as the sport itself. Courses are designed so the natural beauty of the site becomes an important part of the game. Ponds, creeks, and even oceans offer obstacles no court-bound player would ever even consider. Not only is each golf course different, each hole also varies in length, shape, and complexity. That is why golfers can play for decades and still feel challenged every time they step out on a new course. The very first courses in Scotland were carved out by the arrogance of wave and wind. As golf spread past Scottish soil, Land had to be altered in order to make a round more challenging. This gave rise to the golf architect, a combination artist, builder, and groundskeeper. Tom Bendelow would lay out an 18-hole course for only $25. On the other end of the spectrum was Scottish-born Donald Ross. An early apprentice to old Tom Morris, Ross immigrated to the United States in 1898, where most designers stripped the land and built the course they wanted. Ross would study the layout and let it inspire his design. Ross believed the course should be more than a jumble of hazards between tee and cup. He felt each hole should require a different strategy to the experienced golfer. He placed his greens on gently sloping crowns and used bunkers only to make a shot more interesting. These pages are rare color sketches from Ross's own notebook. Donald Ross' crowning achievement was the #2 course at Pinehurst. Little Pinehurst, North Carolina, offers one of the largest concentrations of golf courses in the world. There are 35 golf courses here, one for every 88 full-time residents. Pinehurst #2 features wide fairways and greens offset by strategically placed bunkers. It is a course to challenge the master golfer and the weekend duffer. While Ross was revolutionizing golf course design, another noted golf architect was joining forces with the era's most famous player to create one of the world's most magnificent courses. After losing the 1929 Amateur, Bobby Jones toured golf courses along the West Coast. He was inspired by Cypress Point and course architect Alistair McKenzie. Jones convinced McKenzie to collaborate with him and banker Cliff Roberts on a new project, an old Georgia plantation that would become the country's first national golf club. As co-designers of Augusta National, McKenzie and Jones used the bountiful magnolias, pines, and azaleas to enhance the beauty of each hole. Along with wide fairways, they placed only 22 traps throughout the course. Jones decided to debut Augusta National with a tournament featuring all living U.S. Open and amateur champions. 20 other top golfers also received invitations. The 1934 tournament was dubbed the Masters because of the impressive roster. Walter Hagen, Paul Runyon, Craig Wood, Johnny Revolta, and Bobby Jones himself, playing his first competitive golf since his retirement 4 years earlier. 72 golfers competed that first year, and when the final ball rattled into the cup, Horton Smith was the victor with a 4-round total of 284. Instead of the traditional silver cup, the winner received a green jacket. The man who catapulted the Masters to its present stature was none other than Gene Sarazen. Sarazen did not attend the first year, but accepted an invitation to the 1935 Masters. Partnered with Walter Hagen in the final round, the Squire reached the par 5 15th hole a full 3 strokes behind leader Craig Wood. He would need to birdie the last 4 holes to win. Sarazen's first drive landed him in soggy rough by a pond overlooking the green. Hagen felt the match was over, but Sarazen reached for his 4-wood.
Hagen kept saying to me, "Hurry up, I've got a date tonight." I said, "Never mind." So I get up and address the ball, and I hit it solid. The minute I hit it, I knew I was going to make the green anyway. And it got on the green. There was only 23 people down there. And there was a kid that had a walkie-talkie. I think they had him in those days, and he kept talking to the clubhouse. "Mr. Gene done get a 2 on the 15th hole." And the sports writers were listening. He says, "What the hell is that kid talking about? 2 on the 15th? He mean 2 on the 16th, the par 3 hole. Mr. Gene done get a 2 on the 15th hole." And then the parade started marching down, and I had to play these 3 holes, 3, 4, 4 to tie. They were the hardest 3 pars I ever had to make.
Although thousands claim to have witnessed one of the most famous shots in golf, only 24 actually saw Sarazen's magic. However, among those 24 were Walter Hagen and Bobby Jones. After shooting the first par 5 double eagle in championship history, Gene Sarazen won the playoff to capture the 1935 Masters title. Art may imitate life, and life may imitate art. But nothing could imitate the tremendous power Hollywood wielded on those who struggled through the Great Depression. The growth of Hollywood was a cultural phenomenon. an art form where the artist became more important than the art he or she created. And if they carried a golf club, the entire world noticed. Jack Benny was known to take a swing or two, and other comedians made the links resound with laughter.
Little too much whip in that club, Nimrod. Now stand clear, boy, and keep your eye on the ball. By the way, did you bring a ball with you? Wonderful. Now stand. You don't play golf with these things. There's your marvelous club. Bought that club in Europe. Where's that club I bought in India? Let me see that Indian club. Never mind, wait a minute. I bought a wonderful club in Toronto.
Did you?
Give me that Canadian club. This is a very remarkable piece of wood. I told you to find that, and I wonder what
This young boy is just starting. You're not that far down. The newsreels are on you. Smile. That's it. Now keep your head down once more. Now, when you hit this ball, you got to be awfully careful the way you hit it. No talk. You must never talk when you're playing golf. Now, don't cough either. Now, look at me. Look at me. No.
You could almost call this Bing Crosby's National Kids Tournament. He's been here 3 years in a row. He's done a wonderful job.
And you should call it his tournament because he's got most of the kids.
Yeah.
What'd I say?
I didn't get your name.
Bing Crosby started caddying at the age of 12 and so loved the sport, he would later sponsor a Pro-Am event named in his honor. In his book, Confessions of a Hooker, Bob Hope tells of his lifelong love for the royal and ancient game.
Back, you fool.
With celebrities playing and players becoming celebrities, it seemed inevitable that golf would weave its way into the storyline of Hollywood pictures. MGM Studios' Pat and Mike dealt with the complications of falling in love with a noted woman golfer.
Well, I still think you got possibilities.
Thanks.
You got my card, my business card?
Yeah, oh, yeah.
Yeah, well, get in touch with me. You know, there's a nice dollar laying around waiting for you and I to pick it up.
Well, I'm afraid
I
I'm
mean,
not...
legitimate, you know, legitimate. Oh, there's a, you know, lady athlete, properly handled, always a market.
Always.
I don't think you've ever been properly handled.
That's right. Not even by myself.
The movie weaved actual golf stars into the plot.
Sensational 73. From left to right, Beverly Hanson, Babe Zaharias, Helen Detweiler, Betty Hicks, Mary Morgan, Harriet Salter, and Mrs. Patricia Fenton.
Katharine Hepburn, who played golf since the age of 4, was backed up by stunt golfer Babe Didrikson Zaharias, the first woman superstar of the post-war period. 20th Century Fox cast Glenn Ford as Ben Hogan in the movie biography Follow the Sun.
What's your name, sir?
Ben Hogan, sir.
What are you doing up in the middle of the night?
You know, Val, I think I've figured out something about my putting. You know, if I shorten my stroke tomorrow, maybe that'll help.
I hope so, dear.
Imagine after all these years discovering a little thing like that, huh?
Well, now that you've discovered it, why don't you come back to bed?
No, just a minute, honey. I want to practice just a little bit longer, huh?
Hogan himself did most of the swinging.
But you have no idea what you want. It isn't only the money. It's something greater than that, something I've been waiting for a long time. The gallery. It doesn't scare you anymore. What's the matter? What's wrong?
Say, I didn't pick up the check when I left.
Oh.
See, I'm not used to it. I'll be right back, Val.
Wow, what a screamer. Right over the edge of the ocean.
I recognize West Virginia and asked Mr. Sam Sneed to say a few words. Sammy?
Well, I'll say it quick. He's the same old Hogan. He still scares you to death, and a gamer guy never lived.
After 500 years, the ancient game of golf had gone Hollywood. As the 20th century staggered towards its 4th decade, golf had become firmly entrenched in the American way of life. 100 struggling tour pros had proven that the sport was no longer exclusively the terrain of the idle rich. Playboy or saint, rogue or gentleman, no matter what style you preferred, there was a golfer you could identify with. The proliferation of public courses during the 20s made golf accessible to the average citizen. Whether on public course or private links, golf became a good way to let off steam with your buddies or impress your boss with your civilized talents. It was both a way out and a way in. It was also a lot of fun. On the international scene, the British, Canadian, French, and Australian Opens continued their proud traditions, but it was usually the American golfers who got all the attention. International exhibitions by top pros helped build an interest in golf throughout the world. These rare images show Gene Sarazen's exhibition tour of Japan in 1937. Meanwhile, back in America, there were other boundaries to cross. Although golf was no longer solely a Scottish sport, it was still seen as primarily a white man's game, and many private clubs did little to dispel this image. If anyone doubts that spirit can be as important as size, all they have to do is look at the career of Golf Hall of Famer Patty Berg. Patty inherited her love of golf from her father, even though she started out in a different direction.
I really started in football a little bit before I got into golf. I lived at 50th Street in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And in our neighborhood, about 7 doors from me, was a fellow named Charles Bud Wilkinson, who, as you know, is a famous football coach and commentator, and he was a great friend of mine. Anyway, we had the 50th Street Tiger football team, and Bud was the coach, and he was a guard, and sometimes he played tackle, and he was the captain. And I was a quarterback, because Bud said I was the only one that could remember the signals. We had one signal, 22, and everybody ran whichever way they wanted. And we didn't have any tricky offense at all. We only used a single wing. And I was the only one back there. Now, we didn't lose a game, just teeth. Of course, Bud told me, he said, now listen, he said, you're getting a little bit slow, a little bit too old for this. And he said, I think you ought to get into some other sport because you're not going to go in and play some football. So I went into speed skating, and I skated in the midget division, and I was a member of the Powderhorn Skating Club up in Minneapolis, and I skated in all kinds of state championships and national championships. Well, when I got to the intermediate class, I ran into a girl by the name of Edna Swartz. And I'm going to tell you, I've never seen a skater like this. Zoom, she went by me. And I said to one of the other skaters, Mary Dolan, I said, is she cutting across? How does she get by us so fast? Zoom, all the time. She said, oh no, she's just a fast skater. Well, that was about enough for me. So in 1930, I ran in a track meet, 30-yard dash at the John Burroughs Elementary School. And I won the 30-yard dash, won a gold medal, and also won the track meet. And that's the same year that Bobby Jones played at Interlaken. And he won the third leg of his Grand Slam there. I wasn't playing golf then, but I read a great deal about it. One day, my father said, I wonder who's taking all these divots in my yard. He said, every time I come home, I see these divots. And I wonder who's doing this. So one day he caught me taking these divots, and he said, listen, how would you like to get a golf ball in front of that swing and play golf? Oh, I said, I'd love to, because I can't play football anymore, and skating's gone. And I said, I'd love to play golf. And he took me out then and started me the right way. He started me with golf lessons.
This ambassador of golf would win 28 amateur tournaments between 1934 and 1940. Yet there would be many more records to follow in the impressive career of Patty Berg. Suddenly from out of the Southwest came a posse of steely-nerved, hard-shooting golfers. It was the Texas Onslaught, and before they rode off into the sunset, Ralph Gouldall, Jimmy DeMeritt, Byron Nelson, Ben Hogan, and later Babe Didrikson would corral an overwhelming string of victories and stampede through 20 years of golf's most prestigious tournaments. The first Texan to hit the links was Jimmy DeMeritt, a Houston boy who joined the tour in 1931. One of 9 children, DeMeritt had a quick wit and personal charm that guided him on and off the course. 3 years after he hit the circuit, he won his first tournament, the San Francisco Match Play Championship. But prize money during the Depression was slim, and DeMeritt dropped out of the professional tour to pursue his other great talent, singing. Jimmy DeMeritt made a name for himself in nightclub entertainment, but he missed the competitive energy of the pro tour. So in 1938, he set out on the golf circuit a second time. The temporary layoff had given him time to tighten his game and improve a low, hard drive he called his snake raper. DeMeritt's sharpened skills helped him capture the 1940 Masters in Augusta. After a tour of duty in World War II, he returned to capture the Masters title in 1947 and had a third green jacket in 1950. Gouldall joined the tour in 1932 and just missed winning the following year's U.S. Open by 1 stroke. Like DeMeritt, Gouldall quickly became disenchanted and returned to Dallas to try his hand at selling cars. He rejoined the tour in 1936 after a few pointers from shotmaker Olin Dutra. He also won the Radix Trophy as the tour's low scorer and narrowly missed edging Horton Smith out as that year's top money winner. Ralph Gouldall's claim to fame would be his victories in the 1937 and 1938 U.S. Open. The heavy favorite that first year was a Virginia swing artist named Slammin' Sammy Snead. The backwoods boy with the solid gold swing, Sam Snead made winning tournaments look downright easy. His perfectly executed drive was a thing of beauty, a single flowing motion that made the odd mechanisms of a golf swing seem as natural as a country smile.
I got to the point where I'd go to an old chestnut tree. Then we had a lot of chestnut. The stump, these shoots would come up, made just perfect. They'd take the hatchet and just trim them off a little bit, and they were straight, no limbs on them. And I'd hit rocks and hickory nuts and walnuts and everything. And a ball was a little bit hard for that thing. But then I got where I could cut an old stick on the side of a ridge. It must be a very steep ridge, because then it'd come around, it'd come up sharp, and you'd cut down into the root. And there again, you had something look like something like a hockey stick or a shinny stick or whatever. And be surprised how far you could hit a ball with those things. And I used to have fun. I'd play with a stick and a wedge. And oh, I got a few with those too.
Sam Snead had been the media darling since his wins earlier that season in the Miami Open and the first Bing Crosby Pro-Am. His final score of 283 for the 1937 Open placed him as the man to beat. And that's just what Ralph Gouldall did. An eagle 3 on the 8th hole and fantastic recovery for a birdie on the 12th gave the somber Texan a 2-stroke lead.
With a closing round that stunned Snead and the gallery, he set a new tournament record of 281 and topped the title. It was the first of many crushing disappointments for Snead in the Open Championship.
The following year, Gouldall defended his Open title and became one of only 5 men in history to win back-to-back national championships. That was also the tournament Ray Ainsley submerged his ball and set an Open record of 19 strokes for a single hole. Ralph Gouldall's last great triumph was in Augusta at the 1939 Masters. Again, Sam Snead had taken an early lead, and again, Gouldall pulled out an eagle to win the championship. By 1940, the man who was always a little uncomfortable in the public eye retired from the tour. Ralph Gouldall spent his remaining years as pro at Braemar Country Club. The other members of the Texas Onslaught were John Byron Nelson, Jr. and Benjamin Hogan, who began their golf careers as caddies at Glen Garden Country Club in Fort Worth.
I won the caddy championship. Ben Hogan and I tied. We had played 9 holes, and the members caddied for us, and we played 9 holes, and we tied. And so they wanted to play off. So we went and played another 9, and we par 37 on the first 9 out there, and we both shot 40. And we were just kids, you know, and then we played off, and I shot 39, he shot 40, so I eked him out with 1 shot.
At the age of 20, Byron Nelson took a job as a teaching pro at Texarkana Country Club for $14 per week. The following season, Nelson borrowed $650 to try his luck on the pro tour.
Back in those days, the pros that are on the tour either were pros that had come in from Scotland or England somewhere where the game had started, or through the caddy ranks. You learned to caddy, and then you learned the game, and then you started playing because the game was so small in those days.
Byron Nelson perfected what is commonly referred to as the first modern golf swing, an upright motion that took advantage of the lack of torsion in steel-shafted clubs. His locked left arm and flexible left knee allowed him to move through the swing with extra power. His lateral style used the legs to drive through the ball. On the eve of the 1937 Masters, Byron Nelson had all the components in place.
First round of the Masters in 37 was the best round from tee to green as far as the least number of strokes that I ever played a course in my life. And not the lowest score, but putting on the fairway and in the green, on the green. I played the course, all the par 5s and 2, all the par 4s and 2, all the par 3s and 1, which is only 32 strokes to play the Masters course.
The tournament was a shooting match between Nelson and Gouldall. On the final day, Nelson trailed by 4 as he reached the 11th hole. But an eagle, 2 birdies, and 5 straight pars gave Nelson a record 32 on the back 9 and the Masters victory.
That still is the most important tournament of all the tournaments I've forced to win. I think the most important tournament to me, because the way it happened, playing such a great first round, then faltering, and then playing a great 9 at the finish to win. That told me I could win, gave me confidence in my game, and also gave me a recognition and a little money in my pocket of $1,000.
The 39 U.S. Open was another high-tension shootout. Sam Snead held the lead going into the final 2 holes, needing only par to win the title. But Snead believed he needed more. He pulled the wrong club to land in a bunker on the 18th. It took Slammin' Sammy 8 strokes to hold the ball on that heartbreaking final hole. Nelson ended up in a playoff with Craig Wood and Denny Shute. Shute faded early as Wood and Nelson jockeyed for the lead. Wood's second shot on the 18th hooked into the crowd and knocked a spectator cold. The ball ricocheted off the man's skull to within pitching distance of the cup. The playoff again ended in a tie. The following morning, Nelson's combination of birdies, pars, and an eagle captured the crown for Lord Byron. In the 1940 PGA, Nelson beat Sam Snead by 1 stroke. In the 1942 Masters, he did the same to Ben Hogan. By 1944, Lord Byron and Jug McSpaden ruled the pro circuit. Their string of victories earned them the nickname the Gold Dust Twins. Yet it was the year 1945 that will stand in the record books as one of the greatest golf campaigns in history. On March the 11th, Lord Byron stepped up to the tee to begin his rampage of glory. These pages from Nelson's own diary record his 1945 winning streak. Miami, Charlotte, Greensboro, Durham, Atlanta, Long Island, Montreal, Philadelphia, Chicago. At the PGA Championship, he roared from behind to defeat a stunned Mike Ternessa, who had just finished 7 under par. At the Tam O'Shanter, Nelson beat Ben Hogan and Gene Sarazen with an impressive 11 under par. A win in the 1945 Canadian Open made it an incredible 11 tournament victories in a row.
The thing that enabled me to win those 11 in a row, if any one thing did, was the fact that for the year, and especially in those 11 tournaments, my best round average by far was the last round, the 4th round. So I was playing real well, and then I averaged less than 67.5.
Many have claimed Nelson's string of victories during 1944 and 45 were possible only because other great players were at war. However, Nelson played against virtually every major player in his 9-year reign as King of the Links. For the entire year of 1945, he never shot a tournament over par. Inevitably, the pressure of the tour took its toll on Byron Nelson. Doctors at the Mayo Clinic pointed to golf as the cause of his severe intestinal pains. The stress of another double playoff in the 1946 U.S. Open was the final straw. Nelson announced his retirement from the circuit at the age of 34 and quietly returned to his ranch in Texas.
If there's anything that I ever want to do when I lay everything down is to have people say, well, he was a good man, he deserved some of the things that he did, and he gave a lot back to the wonderful game of golf.
World War II stormed across Europe, Africa, and Asia like a flaming behemoth that would take the lives of nearly 50 million people. Although the German blitzkrieg would not be launched until 1939, the Axis powers of Germany, Italy, and Japan had already begun expanding their borders through small wars and intimidation. Only one generation had separated the incredible carnage of the war to end all wars from the even greater slaughter of the World War that followed. Armies clashed on 4 continents. Hitler's forces marched from the Atlantic Ocean to deep inside Russia. In 1941, the attack on Pearl Harbor brought the United States into the war. On the ground, in the air, and on the sea, millions of young men faced the increasingly efficient weapons of destruction. As in any war, fear and death cared little for the politics that drove men on, and heroism raged in a million frightened hearts. This was World War II. Mankind had perfected total warfare, and for 7 bloody years, an entire world would suffer its consequences. For every action, there is a reaction, and the world of golf was deeply affected by the war. Europe saw another generation of golfers decimated by 7 years of combat. The British Open and all major European tournaments were canceled between 1940 and 1945. The U.S. Open lost 4 years of competitive play, the Masters 3 years, and the PGA 1. In 1942, a substitute national championship was held. The Hail America Open was sponsored by the USGA and featured a field of 1,500 golfers vying for the title. The winner was Ben Hogan, who had yet to win a major tournament. If the Hail America had been an official event, it would have given Hogan his first of 5 Open titles. Many other golfers also did their part. Over 500 members of the PGA served in the armed forces during World War II. Byron Nelson, Jug McSpaden, Porky Oliver, and Olin Dutra played in countless exhibitions to raise money for the war effort. Bob Hope and Bing Crosby added a humorous brand of golf to a war-weary nation. Because Ryder Cup competition had been an early casualty, Bobby Jones built a team to challenge the American Ryder Cup squad led by Walter Hagen. The Jones team won 8.5 to 6.5, and the match raised $35,000 for the Red Cross. Tournaments that did continue offered prizes paid in war bonds, which did not reflect their actual cash value. During Byron Nelson's tournament rampage in 1944 and 1945, he won more than $100,000 in cash and war bond prizes. Nelson's record of 5 major championships would probably have risen if all the majors had not been canceled during his peak golfing years. Food, rubber, and gasoline were in short supply as golf became a fourth front of the war. Most European golf courses became farms and military staging areas. In the U.S., Augusta National was turned into a turkey farm. The rubber shortage quickly shut down all golf manufacturing. Caddies searched throughout woods and bunkers to recycle errant balls lost years before. When the war ended and production resumed, soldiers were the first to receive the new golf balls. Golf also became a recognized method of rehabilitation for injured soldiers. Just as golf helped Tommy Armour recover from severe injuries in World War I, many soldiers of World War II would find the sport an effective form of therapy. The golf boom between the wars had been driven by the personalities of three tumultuous decades: Hagen, Jones, and Sarazen, Weathered, Collette, and Berg, Cotton, Nelson, Hogan, and Sneed. Each brought a rare excitement to the game. Steel-shafted clubs and improved course design made the sport more challenging, and the rise of new money tournaments added a momentum that would carry golf to even greater heights. In the period between the wars, the United States assumed a leadership role in the world of golf. After World War II, America's new superpower status would alter the entire social and political fabric of generations to come.